Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today. We have here today for our cannabis webinar, Marcum, which is headquartered in New York State and is one of the largest independent accounting and advisory firms in the country. They've provided accounting and advisory services to companies across a broad array of industries. Marcum was one of the first national firms to engage with the cannabis industry with over a decade of experience, which anyone will tell you is a very long time in cannabis. Marcum's cannabis services practice works with clients from seed to sale and at every stage of the corporate life cycle, from pre-application to going public. Marcum's expertise helps companies maximize valuations by minimizing tax risk and implementing best practices across an organization. So whether accounting, tax planning, employee benefits, or valuations, Marcum professionals have the experience and the expertise needed to get it right the very first time. Marcum Tech brings that same experience and expertise to deploying real-world technology solutions. They have the expertise and industry-specific knowledge needed to help cannabis companies navigate the complex regulatory, tax, and resource management problems unique to the cannabis industry. So today, we're lucky enough to have 4 industry experts from Marcum's cannabis practice. We have Jill Scher, Martinez, Jayson Morgan, and Robert Drover. Welcome to everyone on the panel. And I look forward to everyone introducing themselves and giving a little bit of background on their respective expertise within the cannabis industry. So I'll hand things over to Jill Scher first.
Okay, thanks, Jill. 2 Jills. I don't really see that many Jills very often, so it's fun to have 2 Jills on the panel. So thank you so much, Jill, for having us here and for the opportunity to speak today. As far as my background goes, I first joined Marcum in 2008, and my areas of concentration are mainly tax and business development. And in the recent years, I've been focusing a little bit more on the cannabis industry. This industry is really phenomenal to work in and to witness. The combination of entrepreneurship, legislation, science, and technology is all wrapped in one and unfolding before our eyes. It's really remarkable. I'm thrilled to be a part of a firm that has consistently embraced this industry, and we've always provided top-notch service and look forward, to everything we're going to do in this industry going forward, especially as it comes to New York. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion today with my colleagues. So I'm going to hand it over to Martin now.
Hello, my name is Martinez. I am a tax partner. I actually physically reside in the Houston office, Houston, Texas. And I actually am part of the National Tax Office and somehow became the subject matter expert for Section 280E for the firm. Must have been my time at University of Texas. So in any event, this group, we work together quite a bit. I would say Jayson and I've been working with Jayson for the last, 3 years now, and we're pretty much a seamless integrated process with it. And it's been nice to have Rob come in here at the end to help implement these strategies, and working with Jill to try and get our New York or Northeast practice up to speed with respect to what we've been doing over in the West Coast. So look forward to the discussion.
Hi, everyone. Jayson Morgan. I'm a tax partner here in our we've got all the bases covered. I'm in Costa Mesa, California, which is, for those of you that don't know Costa Mesa, it's about 37 miles south of Los Angeles in the Orange County, Newport Beach area. So I've been in the industry, since late 2016 when California adopted through Prop 64. And then, everything started going very interestingly, starting in 2017. So it's been a great 6, 7, 8 year ride. And all there is just massive growth in the industry. We've seen all the states many, many more states come online. Exciting to see what New York's doing. We've got a lot to share with you today. I'm the national tax leader for the cannabis industry in our firm. So I do get to very excitingly meet many of these great clients and work with great companies, and also do some pretty exciting work. So very excited to be on the panel today. Thanks.
And good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rob Drover. I'm also a partner within the firm and a vice president of Marcum Technology. We're a sort of a wholly owned subsidiary of our parent company. And we've been really put together to provide, as Jill mentioned, technology solutions to our various partners across the country. I'm based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and have been involved with and part of Marcum since 2015. We have a variety of different solutions that fit this industry, including enterprise resource planning systems, base accounting systems, and other types of technology services that are very apt for this type of industry. A lot of experience in the space, and really look forward to talking about some of the issues today. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here today. I think we'll start with you, Jill. So as a New York-based accounting firm, Marcum must be keeping a close watch on the transition to adult use in the Empire State. Can you give us a quick overview of where New York is as far as rolling out, no pun intended, cultivation, production, and retail?
I certainly will, and I love the puns. So a little bit of history, just to, I'm going to give a very high level overview of what's happening, because it's really just, in the last couple of years. So in March of 2021, New York became the 15th state to legalize adult use or recreational use cannabis. And they had a very heavy priority on social justice and equity. That's one of their main goals here. It wasn't until about 6 months later, in September of 2021, where New York appointed the Cannabis Control Board and formed what's called the OCM, or the Office of Cannabis Management. And now that office is overseeing the rollout of all of the provisions for this market. So what they want to do is create a recreational market, and they want it to be operational by the end of this year, 2022. And in order to do that, they had to, start with the cultivation so that we have the goods to sell, and then the dispensary. They expect the market, the estimated market is about $4.6 billion for New York, which is over 12% of nationwide, a $37 billion market. So New York is going to be a huge component of the U.S. consumption and market in cannabis. And they expect the New York market to grow to about 5.8 billion by 2027, which are huge numbers. So in order to roll out these provisions, what New York has done so far is that they rolled out new conditional cultivation licenses for previously licensed hemp farmers. And basically, the hemp farmers are allowed to cultivate up to 1 acre outside or 25,000 square foot inside greenhouse growth. They're also permitted to use up to 20 artificial lights during cultivation. They're very specific about these rules. And over 200 conditional cultivation licenses have been granted to date of these particular hemp growers that were conditioned over. There's a 2-year license right now. It's a conditional license. So that's the cultivation side. And they could start to grow so that it's prepared for the dispensary opening. On the dispensary side, in June of 2022, which is about a month ago, New York announced a $200 million public/private fund that they were opening that is going to provide, social equity applicants funding that they need and support that they need in order to open up the first 150 dispensaries. They're providing to these social equity applicants, which are very specific, the real estate identification, build out assistance, training, other funding and low interest funding to help them. There's many prospective applicants that are in various stages of preparing for this in New York. And they're hoping to have at least a handful of dispensaries open by the end of 2022. And that's the way it's going right now. All right.
Great. Sounds like there's a lot going on, and Marcum is very involved in the overall process, really assisting, many of its clients, which is really great in this early stage here in New York.
For sure.
So Jayson, as a leader in the cannabis practice for Marcum, I'm sure you've seen many states roll out legalization. Are there lessons to be learned for the licensees, the investors, and others that want to be involved in the cannabis industry in New York State?
Definitely. The short answer, absolutely. It's not like this. This isn't just new today, right? New York, it feels new. But, if you think about medicinal use, that's been going on in the US for actually decades, starting in 96 with California. And so, but the adult use market is very different, right? That's a much more advertised and marketed. It's a real industry. When you take these into these states, so we have about 10 years worth of history when you go back to Colorado and Washington and some of those early adult use states. And so New York can look back, and I think that's what New York has done successfully already in designing their programs. And every state has issues and problems, and they try to go solve those. But I'm going to go off a little side here on why, what those, if I'm speaking to people that are going into the New York industry and saying, what do we need to do? I mean, I think there's some real basics. Again, I'm on the tax side, but you always have to start with, who are going to be my stakeholders? Who's going to be working in my business? Who am I going to employ? And my stakeholders would include anybody that's investing in the business as well. So whether that's debt or equity, how it's going to be owned. Tax structure is very important. Do we want to be a flow-through entity, or do we want to be a C Corp entity? And that's that's a much longer conversation, but those have very different outcomes. And I think, but what that drives towards is what I'll call a financial projection and a business plan, right? Every business, no matter what industry, needs one. But in the cannabis industry, if you don't have a sound business plan and a good forecast for your launch of your business, it's very likely that you'll fail. It is just a very tough industry to keep your eye on the ball of so many things. And as we know, there's income tax issues, which we'll get into a little bit. There are cannabis tax issues, meaning taxes at the local and state level. And a lot of states, as you said, there's a lot of history here where these taxes have been onerous and not conducive to success, and they've hurt many of these companies. So again, long story short, I think a financial projection that really focuses on some of the key elements of the industry, cash and how you manage cash and controls, inventory, how you manage inventory. You need to have a forecast that is, I'll call it stress test, right? You need to have a stress test on your projections that say, if you think of the revenue line and your cost of inventory line, those are really big pieces, and you need to stress test those, because the goal is for that projection to show something at the bottom, and that's called profit. And then that's called cash for either, for the investors or those that are the stakeholders. We do not want to go into a business with a projection that shows us losing money, at least for long term. There may be something in a startup phase, but again, a good financial projection gives you a model to use. Everybody understands. You build all your systems around it, as Rob will get into, and then you have something to walk you through as you go through your launch of your business. Again, there's just too many things that happen in this industry if you don't have a good, sound financial foundation. So. That's my first thoughts.
Absolutely. You're right. I really like the idea of a stress test. And as Jill knows, we could all use...
we could all use a stress test, right?
We could all use a stress test, both in, corporate structure, financial structure, and making sure that we get into things, the right way. And I'm sure your clients rely on you heavily to make sure they kick things off correctly right from the beginning, and really think ahead and project out, as you mentioned. So with that, obviously this is a very complex industry, and many accounting firms are really steering clear of the cannabis industry for that very reason. Has Marcum historically worked, in this space? And if so, could you provide an overview of the types of clients that you serve within a range of startups seeking a license to well-established MSOs? And this question is for you, Martin.
Sure. It's funny because Jayson and I have worked together so long. He is actually, he may have read my outline, but yes, the financial projections are very important. But to your point, it is interesting. There are not a lot of companies, or I know the big four will not do cannabis at all. The plus three, which are your BDOs, the RSM, the grants, the Grant Thorntons, they don't want to participate in the industry, which is great for us. I mean, we're a large national firm, but we provide services to a wide spectrum of clients, from Canadian stock exchange companies, which are generally all U.S. inverted corporations, and then all the way down to license holders, like initial license holders. And so we received a number of requests, like from Portland, Maine, starting to get a number of these requests from New York individuals. There's a number of private equity backed funds that are out there looking for guidance in this area. But if you were to look to a representative list of clients that we do work for, I can give you the ones that are public, that are on our website. I cannot provide names of private companies that we do work for, public or private equity funds. But companies that if you're in the industry, if you're an investment banker or PE fund, you would know them. It's like Loudpack Inc., TerraTech, Trulieve, Cresco. There's just a number of these firms that we do work for, and it is risky. And as Jayson was pointing out, it's a high risk area. The challenges you run into are just unique, because if you're a regular operating company, you don't have to worry about some of these special, unique requirements. I had promised I wasn't going to get too technical, and I won't until we get to this another question that will be coming up, because it's important to do this. But I would say that I believe Marcum is the last firm of the national firms that will be able to provide an opinion on an audit report. So, for example, Canadian stock exchange companies that need to have audited financial statements, Marcum will actually issue that report. Now, what is that? I don't know who our audience is today, but what does that mean? We are able to provide the benefit of some of the largest companies in the space implementing their best practices, which is what Jayson was alluding to, in which with Rob actually implements and executes within the actual accounting software. So it's kind of, you get the best of both worlds when you come with Marcum, because like as Jayson said, Jayson's been in this industry for 10 years, obviously from California, different out there, but he's been in the industry. And so I provide the risk element, which is where I spend the majority of my time. And so what you generally are going to see is a fully integrated life cycle: tax planning, structuring, execution, implementation of the systems, and audit defense. That's generally how this works. So I will stop there, as the other items will be addressed on, I know, a couple of next questions.
Good. Thanks so much. Rob, I could have used you this morning when I was having a little technology glitch. So I'm sure your role within Marcum is very appreciated. And of course, within the cannabis industry, particularly with the complexities, the tax structure, regulatory, and so on. I have to imagine that you're super, super busy. But at a high level, what are some of the key systems that are prevalent within the cannabis industry?
Sure. Thanks, Jill. So, cannabis, like any other, we call it cultivation or farming or business, involves everything from, growing of the plants all the way through to final sale. And as Martin mentioned and Jayson mentioned, there are some regulatory complexities to deal with. So you have stakeholders not only as investors and so on within your own company, but you have the regulatory agencies. In New York, it's going to be the Office of Cannabis Management and so on. Every state has a different organization that are looking for essentially seed to sale tracking of the seeds and the plants and the product produced, because it's a sensitive industry and heavily regulated. So I would say that your typical accounting system that you would sort of buy off the shelf and put in yourself, I won't name names, but I think that some of the ones I'm referring to are really not going to be sufficient for companies getting into this space. And it doesn't matter whether you're on the cultivation side, the dispensary side, or somewhere in the middle in wholesale distribution. You need a more complex accounting system, and we refer to it as an enterprise resource planning. And really what that means is it's more than just your chart of accounts. It's tracking inventory, it's tracking sales, it's tracking the product through the life cycle, being able to do lot number tracking. All these things are very important. So whether you're in the food business or in the cannabis space, you have to track that seed all the way through its life cycle until it becomes a finished product and it's sold to a consumer. So a number of software companies have actually taken their existing products and they've retrofitted them for the cannabis space. And they've actually used the term seed to sale to describe the type of software that they're providing. And then there's been several organizations that have actually written net new programs for this industry, which really look and feel a lot like the space. And so if you were a grower, you're going to see you're going to see cultivation terms and seed terms and so on that make a lot of sense to you versus, like I said, an off-the-shelf package. The other thing to keep in mind is with these regulatory requirements, there's systems like Metric and BioTrack and others that the states have put in place to collect the data, again, from the growers, from the retailers, to be able to track the industry and really figure out where the volume is going and to make sure we sort of take this from a, historically illicit industry into a very regulated and controlled industry going forward. Martin, we'll talk about this a little bit later, and Jayson, the importance of the financials and tracking things correctly so that you can take full advantage of the tax breaks and the opportunities to defend your position when you actually file your annual returns. And last but not least, I would just say that, it goes without saying that cutting corners and trying to do things on the back of an envelope for a set of spreadsheets is not going to be a recipe for success. And Jayson knows this all too well. For those companies that have tried to do things, on the cheap, run into a lot of problems 6 to 12 months down the road when they don't have the data that they need to understand profitability and all the requirements. So starting from scratch with a good system, it may cost you a few dollars more, but get it implemented correctly is going to be the best thing you can do for long-term success.
So Jill, real quick before you move on, Rob, could you hit on one topic? Because I just want to make sure I've experienced this, the topic of be careful what system you use, because if they find out if you're doing cannabis, they may revoke your license.
Yeah, I think, be open and transparent with your the software providers that you're looking to engage in, even the hosting providers that you're looking to engage in. Certain larger organizations have federal contracts, for example, and they're going to be very, very cautious around the clients that they bring on. No different than when you go to your bank and you say, I'd like to have a banking relationship related to cannabis. They may not be able to, from a risk perspective, take you on as a client. It's no offense to you, but you have to find the right provider and be upfront in the disclosure of the type of business that you're doing. And
that is a huge area because it is a very expensive mistake to make.
So across the board, it seems as though we're talking about planning, thinking ahead. It's really important to start things off correctly, and Marcum can support in a lot of different areas to ensure optimal success. So Jill, what is the engagement process with, for Marcum and your clients? And at what point in the business life cycle should a company start working with a firm like Marcum?
All right. So I heard a lot of words here that are very important. We should remember mistakes, expensive, complicated. Those are all things about the cannabis industry. While it's wonderful and everything else, there's a lot of things that really have to be considered. We're always very happy to engage in conversation. And what generally happens is that we get a call. Either it might be someone that's looking for a license at the very, very beginning, or it might be someone that is at a different stage. Perhaps they're already engaged in a legal business and they need more robust financials, or they realize that they've been with a CPA that doesn't have all the knowledge and planning that they really need in this industry. Maybe they decide to get into the cannabis practice industry and they went to their regular CPA and the CPA thought they could do it, and then they realized this is a whole other world.
Martin's smiling here.
Yeah, that's what happens a lot. So we engage in conversation. We have a consultation with the client. We really dig in and figure out what they're looking to do, where they've been, everything about it. One really unique thing about this industry is that unlike other industries, you're dealing with a very sophisticated legacy market or traditional market. In many cases, you have entrepreneurs that have been doing business very successfully for years, making millions of dollars. And now they want to look and get into the legal market. We're a great, place to call to do that, because there's a lot of conversion that's necessary to do that. When I say conversion, there might be tax work that you need to go back and fix. There's probably some forensic work, some bookkeeping that you have to do. And most importantly, it's education. We need to talk to the clients and tell them, this is the way you have to do it. This is the proper way to do it. These are all of the exposure items. This is what, you have to deal with if you truly want to go legal. Clients need help with this, and it's a very delicate situation. What I can say overall is that often it's too late when they come to us. So what I suggest, we're at the onset of this New York industry, come to us or an advisor, come to us, or someone that has extensive knowledge of the industry and of New York and what's going on and all the rules, and talk about what you're looking to do and try to get it right from the beginning. Try to set it up right from the beginning. The structure of the entity is important. The way you do your application for your license, the way you're going to be taxed, the exposure items, setting up your systems properly so that, you have everything, that you can deal with the regulators and deal with the compliance. Because if you have to go back and you have to fix it, it's going to be a problem. And even worse, if you get caught and you're doing something wrong and you get a notice, there's massive penalties and there's massive problems. So we want to fix that right from the get-go, get this right, get a good foundation, and have a healthy, strong business in this awesome industry. So please reach out if you need us, and we'll be there to help you. We'll be there to talk about it. Learn as much as you can, go to networking events.
Let's hope it's never too late, and we're running that stress test early.
Yes.
So that we can, again, be set up to get everything right and really stay out of
it's
trouble.
Never too early, and it's never too late.
Never too early, never too late. So Jayson, from a tax perspective, how do you handle a new client and explain to them that they cannot deduct many of their expenses on their tax return? And what does that mean to their bottom line? And how do you plan for this complication in their taxes? And lastly, what happens at the federal level and at the state level? I know that's kind of a lot in one, but if you want to just cover it.
We could do a 16-hour program on that question, sure. But I'll ferret it down to 3 or 4 minutes. But
okay, good.
Yeah, I think it's important to address. We'll talk on the federal side. I'll address New York State specifically, but I'll start with something else, and that's the IRS and state agencies as well. But the IRS that wasn't really active in the industry. If you think about the cannabis adult use market, as I talked about earlier, the IRS wasn't heavily auditing that industry, our industry that we're all talking about for several years. Well, they finally did, and Colorado and Washington were the first on the block, so to speak. So again, they don't publish percentages, but it's believed by many attorneys and accountants like us that probably 80+% of all license holders in Colorado and Washington have been through an IRS exam at this point, which is pretty astonishing. Where are they going next? Well, the IRS has taken all that expertise and everything they learned, and they're now moving forward into all the other states. And knowing that there's statutes, 3 years on the federal side, typically, you've got a situation where they know they have time. So when they look at states like California and then now New York coming online, they know they have a 2-3 year window once a state comes into play to start those audits. So I bring that up because that's how we start the conversation. We want to be prepared. Not only we want to have great financials for our, maybe our investors, if we're able to raise capital or do other things, we want to have good financials to run our business. But we also, when the IRS does come to the door with a notice of examination, and they really have a very voluminous and laborious request for cannabis companies, very, very demanding. And we've been through many of those with new situations that are brought to us where clients are not prepared and they don't have good information and don't have good records and don't have good systems. That's a very bad place to be. So I'll stop there on that piece, but jump back then to, on the federal side, the big piece here is 280E. 280E was put in place back in the 80s. And that was when cannabis is part of what's called Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act, which is the most stringent schedule 1 and 2. So 280E was put in place to say, hey, anybody that makes, as we all know, we have to report income, even if it's from an illegal act, such as selling a federally illegal substance. But the 280E was put in place and said, you can't deduct any expenses, none whatsoever, none. Well, various case and more detail than you need today. But long story short, that has since modified slightly shortly after that you can recover basis. So that whole concept is cost of goods sold and inventory. So long story short, you have to, have very good financials that can break down your cost of goods sold versus your other costs, because the other costs do get lost. It's called everything that falls below the gross margin line. And there's different rules for resellers, which is retail, versus everybody else, such as grow, cultivation, manufacturing, and production. So if you can imagine a cultivator, a lot of their expenses are going to fall in cost of goods sold. So while they might have a pretty decent 280E bite, it won't be nearly as bad as when we get to retail. Retail is really where it hurts, and that's a big problem. So what happens in a retail situation, I do get to deduct for federal purposes my costs of goods sold, my inventory that I bring in. But if I have 25 bud tenders in my dispensary, I'm doing marketing and advertising, those expenses are not federally deductible. We've seen many, many cases, you're talking multi-million-dollar amounts of expenses that are actually cash paid out where you don't get a federal deduction. And with C Corp rates at 21% and flow through rates closer to 37% on the Fed side, these can be very onerous adjustments. So what we do is we definitely work with our clients to both educate, work with their financial models to understand and build the chart of accounts, build the systems. It's really a completely integrated approach that has to have tax as a big key driver. And all of those need to be very well analyzed for that reason specifically. One thing that is nice, so that was all the bad news. What's the good news? Well, New York State, a lot of states, even though they make adult use legal in their state, there's now, I think, 18 states that are adult use, right? 39 that are medicinal, but 18 states that are adult use now. There's only 5 that have done what's called decoupling. That's where they say, hey, we're not going to abide by 280E for a state purpose. But many other states, there's 13 of them that are adult use legal where they still apply 280E, meaning you're legal for state purposes, but you still can't deduct your those expenses I just described for state purposes. However, California was one that decoupled. New York is another. So that's a great thing. The governor signed that in with the budget approval process back in April, about 3 months ago. That had been pushed, but it did get through again about 90 days ago. So that's great news for New York retailers and anybody in the business that for state purposes, they will be able to deduct all their expenses. So at least we will then at that point be able to look at the federal side for those negative consequences. But on the state side, you could be getting a 10+% benefit there that you would normally not get if you might be in another state. So that's the little bit of good news. But again, it comes down to, there's some other regulations we can get into, but I don't want to be too long here on the description, but a lot to talk about in the tax world.
So furthering Jayson's comments on 280E, Martin, how does a company in this industry deal with the potential risk of IRS audits, and how do potential investors determine if a company is complying with the tax rules?
Sure. So Jayson went through a kind of a litany of issues, and Section 280E is where I spend the majority of my time. As the firm subject matter expert, I will just tell you that this is going to be the one area that will have some technical explanation because it's merited, because this is the law. So Jayson referred to a couple of things. Section 61, you will be taxed on income from all sources. That's what he meant there. Section 280E, implemented as part of the 86 Tax Reform Act, which is just say no to drugs, which means that any Category 1 controlled substance is a very punitive section of the code. Is it intended to be punitive? There are public policy considerations attached to it. That means you are not just not allowed. Like, for example, you don't get an R&D credit. You're not allowed. There are positions out there that have been made by various attorneys on their opinions, whereas you would say, okay, well, bonus depreciation. Do I get bonus depreciation? No, it's a risk. Now you'll fall into the areas of, we'll call it Circular 230. This is exactly what I'm just going to try and put in technical explanation in terms what we have to do as a firm to mitigate risk, but it also provides opportunities for clients, because what Jayson was alluding to is the fact that if you are a cultivator, that there are full absorption accounting rules that you can employ. We at Marcum have developed a model that is a proprietary model that we actually do forecast, and we can go through on a granular level, identify from seed to sale. If you're going to be a fully integrated, if you're just going to be a dispensary, if you're going to be a cultivator, IP folks, because if you ask any cannabis company, a fully integrated cannabis company, what their line of business is, real estate. That's what they do. So we then have to go through the mechanics of, to your point, how do you mitigate risk and return? So we've got to meet the standards under our Internal Revenue Code Circular 230, and it's the regulations that get you to more likely than not. So the model we put together actually gets you there. It measures, you kind of go through this functional analysis of each one of the items. You will then look and see what is it that you can adjust. Look, there's some very creative people out there. I can tell you because we've met most of them. And in this industry, it attracts very sophisticated investors. And anytime you get a private equity fund coming in, and then you're going to get a CFO, you're going to get a cost accountant, you're going to get a controller. So, oh, well, wait a second, I'll use 263A. I'll use uniform capitalization rules. We can't. You can't take otherwise non-deductible to make them deductible. However, there are a number of best practices that we have developed over years. It's interesting. Jayson's been doing this for 10 years out in California. You know, I come in on the financial reporting side as well, because any Canadian Stock Exchange company that we actually issue a report for, I will review. And I will ensure that we're able to meet Circular 230. But then more importantly, that Circular 230 just says, I don't have to disclose on a tax return that I may not prevail under IRS audit. We will always have to get you there, or we will disclose. Well, then so let's say you're going to issue a financial statement. If you're going to, like I said, you get a bank loan, or your investors want to see your financials. Well, now I have to meet the standards under ASC 740-10 for uncertain tax positions. There's a second piece. Now I have to measure it. The tool we developed gets you to that measurement piece. So again, like Jayson said, we could spend 16 hours on this subject on 280E, but that just gives you a little flavor of working with. And again, I can tell you, as some of our competitors out there, we all kind of do the same thing, but we are a stickler when it comes to risk, because that you don't want to expose yourself. And again, from my standpoint, I spend the majority of my time on the tax planning and structuring side. Jayson is as the industry leader, practice leader, his team will actually execute those plans, and then we go full cycle to be able to defend it. And so then ultimately now with Rob's inclusion in his team is, how do you automate this thing? How do you make it seamless? And so we have charts of accounts, best practices, and again, devil's in the detail, because again, the cost that you may incur, you don't want to do it twice. You can always fix it, but then you're kind of stuck. You gotta mitigate, and then you have to kind of redeploy yourself.
So Rob, given the current tax environment that Jayson and Martin just mentioned, and the different treatment of taxes between federal and state law, how can the proper back-end technology assist companies both on the grower and retail side to ensure proper compliance and minimize their tax exposure?
Sure. So I won't do the the tax law any justice. But once you take the structure and the models and so on that Martin and Jayson have spoken about earlier, the first step starts with the chart of accounts. Very simply, make sure that you have a chart of accounts that can accommodate the types of reporting and the types of backup that you're going to need to essentially defend that financial statement right at the end of the year. The next step comes down to, as Martin mentioned, around automation. When you get an invoice comes in, when you get a cost for the organization, you want to do it once, as Martin said, right? You don't want to code it today and 6 months from now when you're under audit go, oh, wait, we didn't code it correctly. Let's go back and redo our 6 months worth of financials. So it's important that you take these models and these positions, plan them up front, and then when those costs and expenses come in, they get coded correctly to the right chart of accounts. They get documented as to what the cost was in great detail. You keep a copy of the invoice and all the other related information. You attach it to the actual invoice document itself, and you make sure that you're prepared. So if you do it well up front, you create your chart of accounts correctly, and you use the technology the way it's been designed, and you enter the detail in the system, then come time for an audit or review or anything, you've got all the information readily at your fingertips. You're not the old days. You don't have the shoebox of receipts that you're thumbing through very quickly in order to provide information. You can't do it. You don't have the time to do it, and you don't have the information. So again, use the systems the way they're designed and get the most information entered in at the time of entry.
Thanks. So we've been talking a lot about tax. Jill, besides income tax, are there other taxes a potential cannabis company, either a cultivator or retail, would need to consider outside of income tax?
Yeah, so definitely here. And tax is really the common theme here, obviously. But with these companies, I'm going to go back to income tax for 1 second. It really depends on when you set up, you can either be an LLC, a partnership, a C Corp, or an S Corp. Those are the basic structures of a company. And depending on which structure you choose, the way that you're going to be taxed for income taxes purposes will be, the way the calculation goes and the form goes, and the actual tax will fall on. It might if you're an S Corp or a partnership, it passes through to the, the owners. If you're a C Corp, it'll be taxed right on the C Corp level. Either way, you're dealing with Section 280E when you're a plant touching business. And as Jayson said, New York State has decoupled or is chosen to decouple. You also have New York City income taxes if you happen to be within the city. So you have to think of local taxes. And then you have all of the regular business taxes that, other industries are subject to, employee taxes, payroll taxes. And if you're in a certain area within the city, you have to deal with commercial rent tax and stuff like that. On top of all of that, there's a special excise tax for the cannabis industry. And the way that New York has this proposed is based on the strength of the THC in the particular product. And it's imposed at both the distributor or the cultivator level, and then also at the dispensary level, at the retailer level. The way that's supposed to be is that it depends on the particular amount of milligrams of THC in the particular product. It's 0.5 cents for cannabis flower, depending on the THC level, 0.8 cents for cannabis concentrate, and 3 cents for edibles. So there's a certain amount of tax based on the product and the level of THC, the milligrams of THC in the product. That's at the cultivator side. Once you go to the dispensary, that's when the cultivator sells it to the dispensary. Once you go to the dispensary and they're selling it to the end consumer, there's an additional 9% tax. A 13% tax, of which is broken down. 9% goes to New York State, and the other 4% is broken out between the county and other localities, depending on what it is. So you have to contend with all of these taxes, and it's a very expensive type of industry and regulated, and and the level, the products that you're selling and the level of THC in them have to be tracked. That's why Rob's software is so important and regulating it. In addition to that, and I'm going to touch on this because I know we're running out of time, there's another very important form that has to be filled out, because this industry is so cash, sensitive, that there's really no standard banking laws, even though the industry, a lot of places use credit unions or other banking types of solutions. Other companies still have to, deal just in cash. And when you're dealing in cash, there's a form called 8300 that has to be filed with the IRS. If a business receives more than $10,000 in cash, they have to report, if there's no tax on it, but they have to report that to the IRS within 15 days of receipt of that cash. So we've had companies come to us. Obviously, they weren't with us. They're new clients to us, but not new to the industry, even if they're legal companies, and they've been dealing in cash. And we look for all of their receipts and who's paid them over the last couple of years. And then we say, show us your form 8300 or have you filed? And they're like, what's an 8300? And each form that is not filed can be up to a $25,000 penalty. The penalties can amount to millions of dollars. There's criminal penalties and civil penalties and sanctions for this. So it's very important that if you're open to getting into this industry, you're made aware of all these requirements from the federal side, reporting, state, locality, and we can help you because that's what we do. You need to have good advisors to avoid these pitfalls and problems because you don't want to have to pay fines. You don't want to have to go to jail, so we can help. There's voluntary disclosures and other types of situations that you can do to clean this up. Even if you've gotten into the situation, it's best to reach out and resolve it as soon as possible.
You covered quite a lot of what we intended to. There may be a handful of questions that we might not get to with more specificity in discussing, challenges between the cultivation side and the retail dispensary side. And of course, these are things in working with Marcum, they can help to answer some of those questions. Also, some of the technology or technical, challenges, obviously, that are different depending on the kind of business that you're operating. But one of the questions that I think, and I think this will be one of the last question, and I think it's, such an important thing to discuss and on everyone's minds. And Jill, you're highlighting, and really all of you, that it's really challenging and difficult to run a business incorrectly and then fix it. But even if you're running a business correctly right from the start, it really has its challenges. And one of the real big challenges now is, as New York State rolls out legalization and companies realize the burdensome regulatory and tax consequences, how will they compete with the illicit market? And do you think they can? And maybe that's a question really, for all of you to kind of cover in the best way possible. But again, somebody gets into business, they're proceeding correctly, and now how are they going to be competitive with all those that are not, handling the business the right way?
Yeah, Jill, I can attest, as being from California, that the black market here is in the billions. I mean, it is unprecedented how big the black market here in California is. It is a constant discussion of how do we compete. So as you said, everybody wants a vibrant cannabis industry in New York. Everybody would want that is on this call, I would assume. How do you do that? You say, okay, I've got people that are playing by the rules, but they've got a 50% bigger problem penalty wise, for taxes and all these things, versus another that does not abide by the rules, is an unregulated. I think there's probably 3 or 4 fronts, just real quickly, that really I think are important, and that's what we've also addressed that here in California. You start with a few that are easier, and then it gets a little tougher. I think you have to educate the market. You need to have education going on with the market. And that comes down to the people that are in business, educating their customers, advertisements, the state itself. There needs to be education about why you go to a licensed retailer, why you buy from a licensed system. Yes, there's a cost element, but there's quality control, there's safety, there's all of these things you can trust. So there has to be some way that there's trust built into the licensed industry such that consumers see that, hear that, and then they go to that. You're never going to get rid of the illicit, but you want to at least do everything you can to educate. The other area is, I think every cannabis industry participant has to be involved in their community. You have to get local level. If you're in a certain area of your locality and neighborhood, you need to be involved. You need to be a good asset for that community, and that will go further with this. People will feel that they want to help, much like a restaurant that everybody loves and loves the owner and loves the fact that they employ 40 people. You can build some of that community going forward. I'll tell you, the biggest, I think, issue is the fact that there's minimal enforcement is really the problem. There's not a lot of focus on enforcement. Cannabis isn't really seen as some horrific thing, more than some of the other things that are on Schedule 1. So the enforcement is always a question. And so how do you do that? There's no cannabis lobby like there is for big tobacco or big pharma. Cannabis doesn't have like these big national lobbies. There's associations and things. And so getting involved there, getting involved politically, and trying to make enforcement more of a priority, I think is another facet. So that's 2 or 3 areas that I think can at least hope to help blunt the effect of potentially the illicit market.
I'll jump in real quick, Jayson, because I think I want to add to that is that Jayson hit kind of nail on the head on this one, is that the quality control standards that you have with respect to regulated cannabis companies versus unregulated. I would just say, not being a user of the product myself, but I would just tell you that the science is involved. It's like alphabet soup when you start talking to some of these botanists, the scientists that are actually engineering these strains. And it is a little more expensive, but you know what you're going to get. There's a quality control aspect of that. I would also say that the enforcement, this is where I think New York has a little bit of an advantage. This whole public-private partnership that they're going to be doing, if the government's involved, there's going to be enforcement of some sort. So you can, there's no doubt, at least in my mind, that over the next several years, 3, maybe even sooner, like California's going to have to get these unregulated into the regulated market to kind of make it fair. Now, I would also tell you from our standpoint, an unregulated person trying to get through client acceptance might be a tough. Our client acceptance procedures are, especially in this area, it makes it sometimes challenging. It depends, because we generally deal with regulated, licensed companies. Now, I will just leave you with kind of the fun part here, is that this is in a very exciting industry. It really is. You get some very smart people in this industry. They're very entrepreneurial. All have the same challenge: cash available for distribution. That's the key. How do I structure my operations, like everybody has said here? How do I structure my operations so that I can get my effective tax rate down from 90% to 70% or less? And it depends. There's always a way to structure it. We have put together some models and best practices, again, using a functional analysis approach that can get you there. And we prevail because we know what it takes to get it done. And it's fully integrated, but it's really exciting stuff. I think New York's going to get the benefit of, lessons learned from the West.
And I think also, going forward with what Jayson and Martin said, it's currently a $4 billion industry in New York. Okay, so think about that. There's a lot of business to do. There's a lot of people that we can hire. There's a lot of things that could be done. And New York, although it's taking a long time, they're really trying to roll this out in a way for social equity, to get a lot of people hired in communities, to help to make this really the best possible dispensaries that are around. They're retrofitting all of them to be beautiful dispensaries. They're providing the training, the resources, and they're really trying to roll this out to make New York be one of the best displays of how a cannabis industry can be run. And if we all, really try to put our heads together and help these companies and, start taking nibbles out of the legacy market into the legal market, the opportunity for growth for all of us, and the hiring and what can be done, and and getting better products that are tested, and and the incentives. Who knows what's going to happen in the next 10 years? I mean, we don't know if it's going to ultimately be federally legal, and then maybe there'll be other incentives. But New York is really trying to do what they can do to make this roll out, even though a lot of people, are saying it's taking a long time. They're very deliberate in their process. So I would say, don't be afraid of this industry. Just talk. One of the things I really love about it when I got into it is there's so much collaboration. We're all in this together. There's attorneys, there's, people that are in ancillary businesses creating the best technology and solutions. And when there's problems and people put their heads together and try to fix it, there's such collaboration, and there's really good people here. So it's a wonderful place to be, and a wonderful place to try to dive into business, and firms like, Marcum, we've been around for 70 years. We're very conservative accountants, even though we look cool right now, we're very conservative, and we will help you to do it the right way. So don't be afraid to contact us. Jill,
can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Well, you definitely all look very super cool, but I know that Marcum brings a tremendous amount of expertise and excellence to their clients. And so I would strongly encourage anyone, who's listening here or will listen in the future to, reach out and get in contact with Marcum for all, tax needs, but specifically, as we're talking about today, cannabis industry needs. And Jill, it would be great if you would provide a way for our listeners to get in contact with you and Martin and Robert and Jayson, even if you just want to provide, one email, one phone number to reach out to you and can get in touch with any of you. And I'm sure there's others within the practice that you can refer them to. So before I hand it out over to you to close everything out, I want to thank you, each of our panelists for providing incredible insight in this very complicated industry. I know that we do have a few questions, but what I'm going to do is I'll share those with you after, and we'll be able to answer any questions individually. And if anyone has additional questions that you didn't post here, then you can certainly reach out to Jill or any of the panelists here.
Sure. And what I can say is, Jill, that we have a very robust website. There's Marcum that you can go to, and there's a cannabis section on the industry. All of our profiles are on there. My email is, my name, jill.scher@marcumllp.com. I will, connect you with everyone on this call if you have a question, and we can all collaborate. We have a dedicated cannabis group that is throughout the entire country that can help you. We're at all the major, networking events. If you're going to be somewhere, let us know if you're going, and one of us will probably be there, and you could stop by and say hello. We'll have lunch with you. We'll chat. We're open to talking anytime you want. We're very talkable, nice people. Anyone else add anything? Go ahead.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
everyone. Thank you so much. And again, I believe there's a few questions, from Thomas and Holly and Anthony and Noel. We will reach out to you. They're really excellent questions. So I'll make sure that I send those over to Jill right away so that they can, reach back out to you. But everyone, thank you for being here. Have a lovely afternoon, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you,
Jill.
For the opportunity.
Take care now.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.